With this video, we are going to present to you the connectivity of the Trio G3 speaker. My name is Armin Kraus and I'm responsible here for customer support at Avantgarde Acoustic. And we start with the connections on the side of the Trio, because the Trio features a technical column that has the passive crossover on the top, a connection duct which is opened at the moment in the middle, and the iTron active amplifier module on the bottom. They are all with screws, so they can be opened or exchanged at the customer's request. The first and most important connection is, of course, the speaker connection, which is done here by WBT connectors. We have one for the tweeter, for the mid-range, and for the low-mid drivers. And the other important connection is here on the top of the iTron, the XLR connection. In this video, we are using both because we are showing you how the Trio can be connected to have passive operation and active operation switchable. And for that, we now need to make all the connections. One connection is already made here. This is the power cable. It's fed here through the rear duct. We've also opened this one. This can be covered, of course, by a cover plate, a cover panel. So this needs to be plugged here, and the amplifier is switched on by this rocker switch. Next connection is the speaker connection. As you can see, the three ways, bass, mid, and high, are interconnected, each positive and each negative, by a trident bridge. So this makes sure that all negatives and that all positives are treated as one input. So it is more or less irrelevant with which I use to make a connection with the power amplifier. So I plug this in here, in the middle, but it would be irrelevant if you plugged it here or here as well. Then I have here another speaker cable, and this one is going over as a jumper cable to the space horns. Again, as these are all interconnected, I can use either pair of them. So now we make sure that any signal that arrives here by the speaker cable from the power amp is also routed to the space horns. Now we can go over to the system, to the hi-fi system. I'm following here the speaker cable so that you can see where it comes from. It goes here into the power amplifier. And you see another one, which is then going over to the other channel Trio, where we of course repeat the same connections, which I can now speed up. Speaker cable from the amplifier, jumper cable towards the space horns. Next connections to make, because we want to use both in parallel, iTron active and passive, is the XLR cable. This one, which is then connected at the iTron input. Now let's follow this one. This is running here along and going up, reaching into the output of the preamplifier. Here we have a preamplifier which is ideal, that has 4 outputs. So we have 2 outputs that go down to the power amplifier and 2 outputs that go through these wires to the trios directly. If this wasn't existing in the preamp that you use, you would possibly need to use Y-shaped adapters to split the signal. So next thing to connect here, on the other channel we already did this, is of course also the XLR cable coming from the preamp. So we plug that here. So now all signal connection is done. And the next thing we need to make sure is that we have the switching unit running. The switching unit that lets you switch between passive and active mode is connected by BNC. There is one cable supplied with every trio that is 10 meters long that interconnects the two trios. So here we have the according sockets, and I fixate now the BNC cable in one of them. It is irrelevant which one is used. They are electrically in parallel. You will soon see why it's still two sockets. So this BNC cable is running behind the space horns, ending here at the other trio. So we do the same here. We connect the BNC cable to either one of these two BNC sockets. And now the second BNC socket comes into play. With every trio there's also supplied another BNC cable, which on one end has a BNC plug and on the other end has the switch, which lets you in a rotary motion switch between iTron and passive mode. So now I connect that cable to the other BNC socket. So now this cable that goes to the switch makes this trio switch, and through this cable that goes over to the other trio in parallel the other one. So this is at the moment all connectivity that we need to make sure is made to have the trio ready for the back and forth switching with iTron and passive mode. So as I told you, this BNC cable has on the other side a switch, a rotary switch featuring the Avantgarde acoustic logo. And as we have connected everything correctly, we have switched the trio on, and here on the sensor, let me touch it quickly so you can see this, we have switched from standby, which is the orange illumination, touch it, to white illumination. So please make sure both trios are white illuminated here on the sensor switch. And in this moment also this switching mechanism is activated. It features the iTron wording, and it has a 0 and a 1 imprinted. 0 stands for passive mode, the 1 stands for iTron mode. And now I switch and you can clearly hear something. And back. Another chattering. And back again to iTron mode. So by this switch, a relay bank is triggered, which you hear chatter, like just explained. This is perfectly normal. This indicates that the switching is working, and which then on the fly, while music is playing, lets you switch between iTron mode and passive mode, so a customer can directly compare the two. As we have speaker level signal on one end and XLR level signal on the other end, switchable, we have to deal with two levels. In the XLR cable, a different level is usually supplied than in the speaker cable. So by switching back and forth, we would also hear sometimes a huge loudness difference. And this should not happen. This is why the amplifier module, the iTron amplifier module, features a total gain stage. This total gain stage has plus and minus 1.5, plus and minus 3, and plus and minus 6 dB attenuators, which work additional. So if I switch plus 6, plus 3, and plus 1.5, this sums up to 10.5 decibels of extra gain, extra loudness. So this means if I switch back and forth between passive and active, I can have a seat on my listening chair and can make sure that I can readjust here via the total gain switches here, that while I switch, the volume is exactly adjusted to the same volume for both variants. So it will not matter if you switch to iTron or switch to passive mode. For the customer, for the listener, it will always be the same volume level. We ship in 0 position, 0 dB gain. So you have up to minus 10.5 if you have a very low level speaker level signal available, or up to plus 10.5 decibels if you have a very high level speaker level signal available, and can make sure that to an accuracy of a maximum of around about 1 dB, the volume is exactly the same for both variants. The Trio has, when it's coming with iTron, a lot of adjustment options or operation options. We have already shown the rocker switch that switches on the power, the mains power. Then we have a trigger input. This is a 3.5 millimeter phone jack. This one is a mono one, but stereos would as well work. So after connecting this here and connecting the other end to any source that offers 12 volt DC triggering voltage, we'll then make sure that the Trio switch is on with this triggering device. How this works is adjusted or is set by this power on mode switch. This is a little screw. You can see the slot here in the middle, so any small screwdriver will do to operate it. And it has 4 modes, A, B, C, and D. Mode A is as soon as the speaker gets mains power, for example, from a switched AC power distributor, the speaker will turn on. Here on the front, we have the standby and on mode sensor. I've shown this already, orange for standby, white for operation. So when this is in mode A, this white light will directly appear as soon as AC power is supplied. Mode B respects the trigger voltage. So as soon as the 12 volt trigger voltage is here on that plug, the speaker will go here to white mode. Mode C, as you can see it here, is the standby mode, which means that the speaker reacts only on your finger touch. So I would say this is the normal operation. Most people will prefer this, so that you decide when is it in standby, when is it on and playing music. And we still have one mode left, mode D. This is previewed for a future option to switch the speakers on by a remote control. If you switch this to a different position than it used to be, say from mode C to mode A, to switch power on, and really power, not only standby, to switch power off and on again, because only then the built-in controller here will read the new setting and activate it. Next thing here is the so-called eFuse reset. All Avantgarde acoustic products from the beginning of the G3 series have here in the fuse holder, which is between the power switch and the power inlet, no longer a typical glass fuse because glass fuses are always a bottleneck for the incoming current. Instead, we put a copper bolt in here. So actually no fuse at all, because inside we have the so-called e-fuse circuitry, which is a very quick and very secure little circuitry that makes sure that overcurrents or other effects that would cause the power supply here to possibly fail and to cut the power immediately within milliseconds, where a normal glass fuse would probably work still for many seconds, if not minutes, before it blows, and the damage could already have happened here. If this e-fuse is activated, we have here an LED, which will then light up with a red light. So this clearly is a warning, something's wrong here. And on the side of this LED, there is a little button, which is flush mount. So you feel it here with your fingertips. And when this red LED would be on, means e-fuse activated, then you can reactivate the speaker by pressing this flush mount button. Then the e-fuse LED will go off and the device will turn on again. If this is not happening and the e-fuse would repeatedly warn you that something is wrong here, then please make sure that the iTron module is thoroughly examined by an electrician. Next thing, which is related to the LED here in the sensor switch, is the so-called dimmer toggle. So again, a flush mount button. My fingers are slim enough to touch it and to operate it from here. Otherwise, you may use, for example, a little pin or a little screwdriver. And now watch what the LED here is doing. Every time I press, it gets one step brighter. And the 8th step is back to minimum. So you can toggle through 8 different settings of brightness according to your environment or to the visibility you want to give to this feature. Next thing is the driver gain. Driver gain means that all drivers, the low mid, so the big horn, the mid, the middle horn, and the high, means the tweeter horn, have an individual adjustment range of plus minus 1.5 dB. Down by 1.5, up by plus 1.5 for all three. So this is an adjustment option for adjusting the tonal balance of the speaker, either to your liking, to your taste, if you prefer a brighter or a darker tonality, or, for example, to mildly compensate for a brightness that the room gives extra, or for a dampening that your room gives to higher frequencies, for example. Cleverly applied, these plus minus 5 dB steps can also be used as 3 dB steps. Because, to show you an example, if I put the mid-range down by 1.5 dB and the other two up by 1.5 dB, my mid-range is now turned down by 3 decibels. Sometimes for older recordings that are not that great and possibly a little bit shrill in the mid-range, this can also be used as a filter to make sure that even those recordings are digestible. But the original factory setting is the 0 dB setting, of course. So we also have 2 more daisy chain options here. Daisy chain option number 1 is with the trigger voltage. So I already showed you that we have an in socket for the incoming signal, for example, from a preamp, while we also have an outgoing 12-volt trigger. So if here we connect the next, for example, a space horn subwoofer device that should go on with the same trigger signal, then this output would send the 12 volt on to the next device, and so on, and so on, and so on, because all avant-garde acoustic products feature an in and an out, which means that one triggering signal, one triggering line can switch on a complete system, no matter of how many avant-garde acoustic products it would consist. And the next daisy chain output is here the XLR. So we have an incoming socket, of course, for a source signal from a preamp, and an outgoing socket that would be used, for example, if this top section, means the passive crossover, would not be present, because then we would not have a signal like here where we use a speaker line, a speaker signal jumper cable towards the space horns, but then we would of course need an XLR signal that is routed on to the space horn. So the signal is jumpering from here to there and going out to the space horn, which means that you do not need any kind of signal distribution here, but this is done automatically here inside, routed to the XLR output. Next item to explain is the operation and connection of the space horn. We were already showing you that you can have a speaker wire, which is now here behind me, towards the space horns to route the signal, the musical signal, also to the bass units. And in the bass units we have connectors here on the inside, which are covered when you close that door. So this is like you would know from furniture. This is magnetic, and so by just pressing you can open and close these. And you can open it completely, so you can have free access here. We have also here connected now the speaker cable coming from the Trio, and as our cables have hollow bananas, plugged on top the jumper cable that goes down here, in this case down to the other subwoofer. It would not matter if you connect it first on this one, on the bottom one, and then go up to the top one, or vice versa. What we also have inside here is a switch that lets you decide whether you have a speaker level signal running here or an XLR signal. The switch is here between the two and can be flipped up and down to make sure the correct source of music is selected. And also the XLR section has an input and a daisy chain output. So multifold space horns, 2 per side, 3 per sides, can be interconnected by jumper cables. Then we have on the side the buttons that let you operate the space horns. This rotary button is just for service purposes, so it is not connected internally, but these two are of major importance. It's volume up, volume down. When I press, you can see here we have, in this case, the factory set -9 dB setting, and if you press it again, it starts moving in 0.5 dB steps up and down. So there's really a fine way to adjust the speakers. Then we have here, I unplug this so it's better visible, 2 LAN ports, Ethernet ports, RJ45 plugs. You can use any CAT cable, Cat5, Cat6, Cat7, Cat8, doesn't matter, that fits the RJ45 socket. And the other one, it does not matter which one you use, top or bottom. The other one automatically is a daisy chain output. So again, multiple space horns can be interconnected with these RJ45 cables, so that in the end, towards the computer that is operating these inputs, only needs one cable towards the space horns. These cables are of course only connected during programming. So as soon as the programming of the subwoofer, the fine-tuning of the subwoofer is made, these can be disconnected, so no cable will be visible here from the side. The USB socket is still present, but it's also only used here for factory purposes, so not user serviceable. Down here we have, again, like explained with the Trio already, the E-fuse. So as soon as this LED would go red, we would know the E-fuse has reacted and has covered you from damage that would come from mains power. And we have the flush mount switch that lets you reset it once it jumped to red. And we also have the power on mode. So mode A, B, C, D, permanent power, trigger power, standby by this button, orange for standby, white for operation. And we have the same LED dimmer toggle. So every time I press, the brightness changes and I can go to the highest or to the lowest.